Hi, and welcome to Element 7 Concrete Artisan Training 4418, Two-Step Interior Staining Part 1. This is how we make raving fans with an imperfect and inconsistent product. So to start with, you kind of have to understand how our sales process works and what the customer already knows. We start the conversation talking about why we bother doing this, why it's the most aesthetically timeless, most durable thing that can be done, why it's a good choice, but then we also talk about why it's not for everyone and that it's inherently imperfect and unpredictable. So you got to know that in case things go really sideways and we have to kind of reframe things back to what we started talking about in the beginning. The floor may have features that they don't like, and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen when we stain concrete. And so you have to do it world class, and you have to manage the experience so that everyone feels good about it at the end. That's the goal. That starts with doing world class work. If you're sloppy, they will not trust you, and they probably shouldn't. If you make obvious mistakes, it's going to be harder to trust you. More importantly, if you don't own your mistakes and then work to fix them, it's going to be even harder to trust you. You have to be as competent as you can be to create trust. Now, character will lead to competence, which leads to confidence. Here's what I mean by that. If you're free and honest, you admit there is a gap between what you know and what you'd like to know. Now, if you're not lazy, you'll work to close that gap. And if you've worked as hard as you can, then you'll have a real confidence. And I almost hate that word confidence because I don't want a bunch of con artists out there. Confidence, it's almost a dirty word because so many people fake it till they make it. That's not at all what we want to be. The truth is there's no substitute for doing your homework. And now in 2018, there's 3 simple steps to learning more about anything. You go to google.com, you enter your question or idea, you press the button, and voila, all the world's knowledge is at your fingertips. So some things that you may consider searching about after this thing is color theory, interior design, architecture, anything that intersects your work here that you can get truly curious about because your curiosity will actually drive your research. So color theory, the subpoints there, simultaneous contrast, that is how a human being perceives 2 colors at the same time because we never see color by itself. It's always the contrast of 2 things. Color bounce is light hitting a wall, let's say it's yellow for instance, and making the floor look more yellow because the color bounces off that yellow wall. Understanding how those things work might give you tools to speak intelligently about it if things are a little bit sideways. Again, the point is not to become a good talker. The point is to learn how to listen and know the right thing to do. So you talk if you must, but doing the right thing is way more important than learning how to explain doing the wrong thing. So again, you can get on Google and you can search the materials that we use, the processes that we use, how it all comes together, and then things that you're genuinely interested in. Rediscover your curiosity. In this example video, you can see we're just Googling concrete densifier, and you get the whole backstory so that you can talk in your own words as someone who did the research themselves about how densifier works and why we use it and choices and all that other kind of stuff. You got to know that you might be here for a reason. Innovation comes at the intersection of different trades. So some of what I learned about distressing color came from working at Leslie's Pool Supply when I was like 20 years old. So one of the things you might want to check out is how to acid wash a pool, because the way that you get stains off a pool is pretty similar to how you might get stains off of the part of the sidewalk you're not supposed to stain, for instance. Again, this could be the best job in the world. You're genuinely asked to innovate and create. You can get curious again, but you've got to do the work to learn, and then you've got to practice where it doesn't count. We can't be practicing on paid projects, customers' things, figuring stuff out. You do that work at the shop or in your backyard. So some of the terms that we're going to use here we want to get clear on. We call dye penetrating stain, and that's to make it clear that we're not talking about dye and seal, which doesn't work, or any kind of dye that doesn't get into the concrete and wear like an Element 7 concrete floor should. Chemical staining is obviously chemical acid stain. We use the word hot to describe extra muriatic acid added, or we'll use that same word to refer to something that's still reacting. So if we're rinsing hot, we're actually neutralizing and taking the residue off before the reaction is finished. Acid washing is a wet-on-wet use of acid to remove color rather than to stain it. And then setting would be the opposite of that. That's allowing the acid or stain to react, dry, and then neutralize it. So penetrating stain versus reactive stain. Chemical never comes off from moisture vapor transmission, and that MVT is a word that you're just going to want to know. And we think that makes the prettiest earth tone floors, but it's slow and it's unpredictable. When you're acid staining, a lot of water is good. And the color, although it's unpredictable, it's hard to really go wrong. They're just so natural. The analogy I always use is what color shirt goes with these jeans. All your shirts go with those jeans. The flip side of that, or the other alternative, is penetrating stain, which for us now is Ameripolished Sherlock dye. And that's great because there's a lot more colors and the results are fast and predictable. So when we're adjusting color, we can see what we've got right there. Now with this though, water is not your friend. And so per always, when you rinse residue, you want to work tightly together as a team. You don't want to flood that floor with water and drive a whole bunch of water into it if you can help it. This stain must penetrate, so if there's any excess on the top, we want to take that off in our process rather than leaving that to be walked off over time. So again, acid stain takes hours to create color. Tan stain is bright green in the bottle, and it reacts with the lime and the concrete to create that color. So the residue that we rinse off is usually not the color of the floor that we're after. It's also important to note that porosity affects how the color looks. Porosity just means how porous it is, how rough it is, or how smooth it is. So polishing, densifying, and stain guarding, and sealer especially, will affect porosity. So here's a quick case study. This is an outdoor piece of concrete after we sprayed stain. This is after we rinsed residue. This is halfway done sealing. This is the look of it when it's sealed. And I just show that right quick to show that porosity affects the color. The sealer pops that, and you really see it. So because we're creating warmly colored floors with acid staining, when we rinse residue, we look at the color with the client, and you have to have a feel for how much that densifier, polishing, or stain guard will affect the color. You have to be confident through this process, despite the fact that you can't totally know what that's going to look like. It is affected, and also nobody really knows how that color is going to look when the house is finished as opposed to the way it does that day. There's efflorescence, there's darkening over time, there's also an effect on how it's perceived because of the light bounced on what you're looking at and the other colors and the amount of light that's in there. So it's not a problem to solve as much as it's a tension to manage between having some control, not having control, and knowing that all of that is really okay. So you go into that thing having a plan B and a plan C ready. So the floor might look good or you might have to do something. It'll probably be neutral enough to go with anything, but the whole time you're rinsing residue, you want to think about the customer, like what they're looking for, the pictures that they liked, and think about how you're going to have that conversation when it's done. So just kind of going through like the plan B's and C's. Plan A is obviously to do nothing. The color is spot on, and that's often the case. Plan B is to use a penetrating stain. Sand dye from Ameripolished is fantastic for a lot of things. You can mix black and sand together to get a color close to Chemical's walnut. Quick note, walnut dye from Ameripolished is terrible. We'll never use it. Your plan C would be to restain the floor with acid stain in a stronger dilution. Common mistake is to add more acid on that second pass. Generally not a good idea. More acid added to stain is not always helpful. We started adding acid to mixed acid stain when we were doing high dilutions of Chemical Black or Schofield Dark Walnut. That was because the water was caustic, meaning it was the opposite of acid, and adding a lot of water would neutralize the stain. It wouldn't even be acid stain anymore. So we added acid to the water before the stain, so it was still acid stain despite having a lower concentration of the metallic salts, the colorant. Adding acid to stain was also done to overcome really tight finishing when we were staining floors without grinding or honing. Now that we're diamond polishing, it's not as useful, frankly, because the diamonds are going to scratch that floor and open it up so that your stain is going to penetrate without having to add a lot of acid to it. Concrete stained with muriatic acid and water is a yellow color. In fact, one of the best ways to get a floor looking like golden wheat on the chemical color chart is just to acid wash it aggressively and seal it with CSS. Again, adding acid to a mix will not make the stain darker. It might make it lighter. It often will make it lighter. So a 3-to-1 walnut is actually darker than a 3-to-1 walnut with a lot of acid added to it. So back to our options to adjust color. A, B, C we kind of talked about. Plan D would be to acid wash the floor to distress the color, and we can have a separate module on what acid washing looks like, but really the video is already out there on YouTube regarding pools might be better for that. The next thing would be running step 2 or even dropping down to step 1 to sand off the color if it went way too dark and we got to go backwards. And plan F might be some combination of those things above. So for instance, if we have a floor that we're looking for like a black acid stain to get some browns, but then we also want some charcoaly gray colors, by distressing that with our step 2 tooling and then turning around and using gray dye, we can really get some interesting colors, and it's good to know what all those tools do so that you can mix the options together and get there. At the end of the day, you're in charge of making a raving fan. You want to adjust the color only if needed. If it looks like we don't know what we're doing, it's hard to be a raving fan of that team, right? We want to get the color to something the customer feels great about, so that means letting them have a hand in it if they want to, but knowing when to take control and when to engage them. There's been clients in the past that we try too much to engage them, and they just want us to fly the plane to where it needs to go rather than telling them how high the plane's flying. That metaphor means they don't care how we're doing it, they just want to get there, and they want the professional to make the decision. You kind of got to use your intuition, and that's why it's good to start your day when you're rinsing residue thinking about how you're going to have that conversation. What kind of person is this? How do I want to communicate with them? So again, we want to make a raving fan, even though the experience of having this floor created might not be ideal because there'll be all these things that pop up. It can only be good if your performance is world class despite that. So you got to go into it also being confident, knowing that most owners, even if they have a really sideways experience making the floor, they learn to love the floor over time. So here's a quick video of a guy I ran into at Walgreens after doing
I don't know, 6 months or a year after we did your floor. James, how's your floor holding up?
Oh, it's doing well. I told Corey that it actually looks better as it ages. Some of that top wax is wearing off. That had me worried at first because it looks so scratched up. But now that wax is wearing off. It's nice and shiny. We just had it cleaned the other day and looking great.
Awesome. Thanks, James.
All right.
So we might not use paste wax anymore, but we do run into our customers at the store all the time, and almost categorically, everyone learns to love the floor more over time. So that's the end of Artisan Training 4418, two-step interior staining part 1. As always, now you want to do the real work. You want to be a design professional and stay current. Find some design blogs, magazines, books that you can be genuinely interested in so that when you talk, it might be some of my words, but it's really your words and how it resonated with you. Thanks for watching.